සියලුම SLT මොබිටෙල් සේවාවන් MySLT ඇප් එක හරහා කරගන්න. සියලුම SLT මොබිටෙල් සේවාවන් MySLT ඇප් එක හරහා කරගන්න.
දසනකාන්තී චූර්ණය සහිත ලීවර් ආයුෂ් දන්තාලේපය දත්වල ඇති ප්‍රශ්න 10ක් වළකයි.
Tonight, going forward, Fitch Ratings points out to Sri Lanka's political instability as an impediment in implementing the reforms needed by the IMF. The green light. Although Sri Lanka reached a staff-level agreement with the IMF, will $2.9 billion be sufficient to rescue the economy? Central Bank Governor comments. Temporary provisions. Interim budget for 2022 passed in Parliament with a majority of 115 votes. Focus. Sri Lanka needs a National Tax Council, revise spending priorities and make competent decisions.
Shonky, fraudulent decisions has to stop.
If I am paying a rupee more of tax, I want the government to cut down expenditure.
In the government, there are no people who understand tax properly.
All this and much more coming up tonight on First at 9, this Friday the 2nd of September 2022.
Vim Deera milliliter CA Smart Pack එක රුපියල් 85ට දැන් වෙළඳ පොලේ.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening and welcome to AdaDerana 24's English News. I'm Andrew Bernard. Now in your top story for tonight, after the staff-level agreement was reached between Sri Lanka and the International Monetary Fund yesterday, Fitch Ratings said today that the agreement appears to signal a sharp change in policy settings in order to achieve macroeconomic stability. The sovereign ratings agency, however, said political instability will pose risks to the implementation of reforms and the distribution of IMF funding, even if a debt restructuring is agreed. In a statement, Fitch Ratings says the IMF staff-level agreement with Sri Lanka on a $2.9 billion program confirmed yesterday appears to signal a sharp change in policy settings in order to achieve macroeconomic stability, including through large fiscal adjustment, greater exchange rate flexibility, and more central bank autonomy. It said that this should facilitate negotiations with official and private creditors, but the timing of any debt restructuring agreement remains uncertain. Fitch says the extended fund facility will not be approved by the IMF's executive board until the government has implemented a number of agreed prior actions. Financing assurances have been received from official creditors, and good faith efforts have been made to reach agreement with private creditors. Fitch went on to say that the IMF has assessed Sri Lanka's debt burden as unsustainable, so the outcome of negotiations with creditors should involve debt relief. The sovereign rating agency says tax reform will be an important element to an agreed program. They also expect additional revenue raising to be the main driver of fiscal consolidation. However, the budget signaled that there will be reallocation of expenditure towards social spending to cushion the effects of the economic crisis. It adds that political instability will pose risks to the implementation of reforms and the distribution of IMF funding, even if debt restructuring is agreed. Fitch says additional social spending may not be sufficient to prevent public opposition, particularly given that the government's public support appears weak in their assessment, and that the economic growth recovery in 2023 to 2024 will be constrained by the strong fiscal consolidation. Now, the central bank governor, Dr. Nandalal Veerasinghe, says the IMF endorsement along with the staff-level agreement for $2.9 billion to Sri Lanka through the extended fund facility will definitely aid the country in attracting bilateral and multilateral partners to provide more funds to the nation. Speaking to AdaDerana, the governor said, however, that the sum will be insufficient to help the country get out of the current economic crisis.
The IMF financing will provide certain support to finance external financing gap for the country and also for the government. But that is certainly not sufficient to fill the all external financing gaps. There are several other ways. With the IMF on board and with their endorsement for our macroeconomic policy package for the next few years, there will be other partners like Asian Development Bank, World Bank, other multilateral agencies, and also some bilateral partners will also enhance their support to finance our external financing gap over a same period of time. That's one part. Other one is also we will get relief from our external debt service obligations that we are supposed to meet our debt service obligations for next few years. That certainly with the debt relief we are seeking from our creditors, that will also provide some additional financial support for us to manage the external balance of payment position as well as to bring down the debt service obligations and also manage our balance of payment prices going forward.
Speaking further, the central bank governor explained the central bank's role regarding the disbursement of the IMF funds.
Overall macro fiscal program has certain key elements. One, revenue-based fiscal consolidation, which is the responsibility of Minister of Finance, and also from the central bank point of view, we have the responsibility of implementing monetary policy reforms, implementing right monetary policy, managing exchange rate on market-based mechanism, and also build up our foreign exchange reserves over a period of time, and also preserve financial system stability, mainly the banking sector financial system stability. That's also all central bank responsibilities. In addition, there are several other responsibilities by other government agencies, like, for example, structural reforms in state-owned enterprises like CPC, CB, Silicon Airlines. That's also will be responsibilities of all the ministries, those who are supervising all these state-owned enterprises. It's a combined effect of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, Minister of Finance, and other agencies, those who are responsible in implementing all these reforms within the period that we have committed during the IMF program.
Now, former central bank governor Dr. Indrajit Kumaraswamy says the staff-level agreement reached with the International Monetary Fund is a landmark achievement the country has made, adding that it lays the foundation to the future. Addressing the 72nd anniversary oration of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, the former central bank governor said the technical work of the central bank needs to be safeguarded from politicization.
We have got to a position of laying the foundation for the journey ahead by reaching staff-level agreement. It is actually a landmark achievement to have done so. I know Sri Lanka has had 16 programs with the IMF before, but no other program, I'm sure, would have been as complex and as difficult to negotiate as this one because of A, the depth of the crisis, and B, the added layer of debt sustainability that was part of the negotiating process. Now, of course, we need to get our heads down and work to make sure the program is realized and the country is taken out of the current crisis.
Speaking further, former central bank governor also explained the importance of the central bank's independence.
Has been the focus of much discussion in Sri Lanka and elsewhere for many years. There are a diversity of views on the subject. At one end of the spectrum, there are those who claim that central bank independence can erode democracy. It is pointed out that too much power can be given to a group of unelected individuals. On the other hand, it is argued that politicizing a central bank and subjected to short-term political expedience when the role of central banks is to create the conditions for long-term economic and financial system stability is a very unwelcome development. The extent of central bank independence can vary from country to country. However, in Sri Lanka, where politics impinges upon all aspects of life and is highly adversarial and patronage-driven, it is important to insulate the central bank's technical work from particularly the short-term expedience associated with politicization. This independence needs to be embedded both in processes and in the law. I believe there is a strong case for doing everything possible to safeguard the space for the CBSL to operate without political interference, particularly in relations to its technical work.
Now, the Japanese Finance Minister Shunichi Suzuki today urged all creditor nations to discuss Sri Lanka's debt restructuring. In a news conference, he said it is important for all creditor nations, including China and India, to gather to discuss Sri Lanka's debt restructuring. Earlier too, the Japanese finance minister was quoted as saying that Japan will coordinate to resolve Sri Lanka's deepening financial crisis with active cooperation with other creditor countries and public organizations. Stay with us for more news after this short break.
කාලගුණය කොහොමුණත් රයිනෝ නං වාලට සේෆ් තමයි මුළු ගෙදරම. Rhino Cement Roofing Sheets. Then you know Rhino. I know.
Big 3.
Welcome back. Now the second reading of the Appropriation Bill amendment outlining the government's fiscal requirements for the remainder of 2022 was passed in Parliament today. The second reading of the bill was passed by a majority of 115 votes. 120 lawmakers voted in favour of the bill, while 5 voted against and 43 abstained from voting. The third reading, meanwhile, was passed with amendments and without a vote.
IMF එකත් එක්ක ගිවිසුමක් අත්සන් කළා. දැන් මේ ගිවිසුමේ තියෙන විස්තර ඔක්කොම අපි දන්නේ නැහැ. අපි IMF එකත් එක්ක අත්සන් කරපු ගිවිසුම ගැන විරුද්ධ වෙන්නේ නැහැ. ණය ප්‍රතිව්‍යුහගත කරනකොට ඉතිරිය බැංකුවල තියෙන තැන්පත් විශ්‍රාමික ඉතිරිය EPF එක මේව ඔක්කොම වල වටිනාකම 50% ගිහිලා තියෙන හයිපර් ඉන්ෆ්ලේෂන් එක නිසා ඒ වලට අත තියන්න එපා කියලා අපි කියනවා. ඩොමෙස්ටික් ඩෙට් රීස්ට්‍රක්චරින් එකේ ඒ කෑල්ලට අත තියන්න එපා. බැංකු පද්ධතිය කොලවන්න එපා. තායිලන්තේ වගේ නෙමෙයි. අපේ බැංකු පද්ධතිය ප්‍රශ්නයක් නැහැ. ප්‍රශ්නයක් ඇති කරන්න එපා කියලා මම සඳහන් කරනවා.
මම හිතනවා ඉස්සරහට අපිට යනකොට අපිට රෙමිටන්ස් ටික ලැබෙනකොට අපිට IMF එකේ පළවෙනි ඩ්‍රෝ එක ලැබෙනකොට අපිට ADB එකෙන් පළවෙනි ඩ්‍රෝ එක ලැබෙනකොට අපිට වර්ල්ඩ් බැංක් එකෙන් ඊළඟ ප්‍රමාණය ලැබෙනකොට මම විශ්වාස කරනවා රුපියල් 300කට විතර වටලා අඩු කරලා උද්දමනය පාලනය කර ගැනීම සඳහා ලොකු හැකියාවක් තියෙනවා කියලා. 1978 81 වර්ෂයේ දළදාතික නිෂ්පාදනයේ 20ක් 21ක් බදු හැටියට ලංකාව ආය කරගත්තා. ක්‍රමක්‍රමයෙන් මේක අඩු වෙලා ගිහිල්ලා මේ අවුරුද්ද වෙනකොට දළදාතික නිෂ්පාදනයෙන් 8.3ක ප්‍රමාණයකට බදු අඩු වෙලා තියෙනවා. එහෙම රටක් පාලනය කරන්නට බෑ. රටක් අනිවාර්යයෙන්ම කඩා වැටෙනවා. මේ බදු ප්‍රතිශතය දල වශයෙන් අවම වශයෙන් මධ්‍ය කාලීනව 15කට 16කට වැඩි කරන්නට ඕන. දීර්ඝ කාලීනව 18කට 20කට යන්න ඕන. එතකොට තමයි ඒ ප්‍රතිලාභ ලබාගෙන අපිට අධ්‍යාපනයට යොදවන්න පුළුවන් වෙන්නේ. යටිතල පාසුකම් වලට යොදවන්න පුළුවන් වෙන්නේ. සෞඛ්‍යයට යොදවන්න පුළුවන් වෙන්නේ. දුකී දුප්පත් ජනතාව ආරක්ෂා කරගන්නට පුළුවන් වෙන්නේ.
කුමන ආකාරයේ බදු ප්‍රතිපත්ති ඇති කළත් නිසු බදු ආදායමක් රජයන්ට අය වෙන්නේ නැහැ. අද වෛද්‍යවරු, නීතිඥවරු, සමහර නීතිඥවරු, සමහර ඉංජිනේරු මේ අය ලබා ගන්න මුදල් හරියාකාර වලට පෙන්නනවාද? ඒ මුදල් ලබා ගන්න අපේ වැඩපිළිවෙලක් තියෙනවාද? ඒ නිසා මම ඉල්ලීමක් කරනවා මේ පේමන්ට් සිස්ටම් එක හදන්න කියලා. විද්‍යුත් ක්‍රමයට ගෙවීම් කළ හැකි ක්‍රමයක් ඇති කළ යුතුයි. මේ ක්‍රමවේද හරියාකාර කරන්න අවුරුදු 18න් පස්සේ සියලු දෙනාටම ලියාපදිංචි කරන්න වැඩපිළිවෙල හදුවම කියනවා ඔන්න අවුරුදු 18 කෙනාටත් අද බදු ගන්න උත්සාහ කරනවා කියලා. බදු ගන්න උත්සාහ කරනවා නෙමෙයි අපි හැමෝටම 18න් පසු ලිපිගොනුවක් ඇති වෙන්න ඕනි. දැන් ඒ නිසා ඒ ලිපිගොනුව ඇති කරලා මේ රටේ ක්‍රමවේදයක් හදලා විද්‍යුත් ක්‍රමවේද උපයෝගී කරගෙන පේමන්ට් සිස්ටම් එකක් ඇති කරලා කරොත් අපිට මේ ආදායම ඇති කරගන්න පුළුවන්.
ආර්ථික කරමුදියක් තිබෙන වෙලාව, ආර්ථික කඩාවැටෙමින් තිබෙන වෙලාව, සුළු මධ්‍යපරම ව්‍යවසායක සාමාන්‍ය ආදායම ලබන කෙනා මේ හැමදේම මොකද වෙලා තියෙන විශාල අර්බුදයකට පත් වෙලා තිබෙනවා. ඒ නිසා ගරු නියෝජකයන් මේ අයවැය ලේඛනය උඩ සාර්වාර්ථික දත්ත ගැන කල්පනා කරනවා. අයවැය හිගේ පියවගන්නේ කොහොමද? නේද? ආදායම ඒ සාර්වාර්ථික දත්ත විසඳගම මේක හොඳයි ආර්ථිකයකට අවශ්‍යයි. හැබැයි ජනතාවගේ ජන ජීවිතේ පොඩිපට්ටම් කරන්න නෙවෙයි.
අපනායන ආර්ථිකයකට අපි යොමු වෙන්න ඕන. බලන්න වියට්නාමයේ අද ලෝකේ තුන්වෙනි සහල් ලේම තුන්වෙනියට ලෝකේ අපනායන කරන්නේ වියට්නාමයේ කොමියුනිස්ට් රටක් වුණත්. අපි පුළුවන් තරම් විදේශ ආයුධනක ලංකාවට කැඳවන්න ඕනේ. මොකටද? අපනායන භාණ්ඩ නිෂ්පාදනය කිරීම සඳහා. අනිත් එක තමයි පුළුවන් තරම් නිදාස් වෙළඳ කිවිසුම් ඇති කරන්නට ඕනේ. අපේ රටේ 3යි තියෙන්නේ. වියට්නාමයේ මේ වෙනකොට නිදාස් වෙළඳ කිවිසුම් 26ක් ඇමරිකාවත් ඇතුළු රටවල් එක්ක සම්බන්ධයි.
For the next 18 to 24 months, Sri Lanka will undergo a period of heightened economic reforms which will eventually lead to the formation of more robust national economy. Proposals introduced in tax administration are futuristic. In the area of non-tax revenue, I am happy to note that His Excellency the President Ranil Wickremesinghe has brought were thought to fit to include a proposal to make the Sri Lankan mineral and mining industry reaching a revenue target of rupees 2 billion per annum by value addition by attracting joint ventures with advanced technology. Restructuring of state-owned enterprise also is a major area of concern to any government, which again has been ambitiously taken for reforms in the interim budget, which is admirable. It is my view that we need to think afresh about the whole concept and approach to the SOEs and limit the involvement of the government to the bare minimum while strengthening its regulatory role. Like in many other developing and developed countries, I strongly believe that the government has no business being in business. We should leave it in the hands of the private sector whilst strengthening the policy formulating and regulatory functions under the government authorities. Such a reform will push Sri Lanka also up in the world doing business ranking, resulting in attracting global investors in Sri Lanka.
The vote for the second reading of the Appropriation Amendment Bill was held this evening. It was passed in Parliament by a majority of 115 votes. Announcing the results, the Speaker of Parliament said 120 lawmakers voted in favour while 5 voted against. 43 abstained from voting. The third reading meanwhile was passed in Parliament with amendments and without a vote.
Now, tax experts propose that Sri Lanka needs to establish a National Tax Council in order to better handle both tax policies and its administration. Speaking to Indivari Amavatta on our current affairs program at Hyde Park on AdaDerana 24, Tax and Regulatory Principal at KPMG Sri Lanka's Suresh Pereira believes that this is the solution to dealing with inconsistent tax policies, as the government lacks individuals capable of understanding the formulation of tax policies. Adding on to these remarks, Managing Partner of PwC Sri Lanka, Sujiva Mudalige, emphasized that Sri Lanka could get out of the current crisis by increasing allocations for education and health instead of defence.
The President says this budget will lay the foundation going forward for the 2023 budget as a national policy, but the question remains whether we have enough room and space to breathe as a result of policies brought about by the government, and given the challenges and increasing prices of food and other commodities, and on the other hand the reforms that are expected by the IMF.
Basically what the budget has pronounced is you can see some sort of semblance of normalcy in 2025. Now if you see the revenue estimates for 2022, the revised one, it is only 2 trillion. That is after all these revenue proposals that have been pronounced in 31st of May by the Prime Minister's office, and that has been pronounced now, the rates have gone up. 2.2 billion was the 22 estimate when November 21, but it has come down to 2 trillion. So that shows the earlier one is fully exaggerated, and we, even with the revised one, we are not getting 2.2. But if you see the expenditure side, recurrent expenditure was about 2.9 trillion, that is going up to 3.6 trillion. 700 billion is going up, is being increased. The main ministries which are going to consume that, the increased amount is energy, it's about 270 billion. Agriculture is about 115 billion. Education is 70 billion, and health is about 96 billion, and don't forget even the defense is going up by 3 billion. Greatest challenge we have now, if we are going to survive with the IMF, debt sustainability means we have to go and demonstrate to IMF that we have the capacity and we are negotiating with our creditors to phase out the debts. 3 ways you can do it. One is to haircuts, you cut off part of the debts. Other one is you extend the term period. Third one is you can give increased rates. Now if you go and tell the creditors we are in a mess, we want to pay you, like going to a bank, the bank won't. They will restructure for them to get whatever they are losing now, if at all, in the future. So you have to have the debt sustainability, so the rupee side and the dollar side. And in the dollar side, why there is a uneasy calm or normalcy now is either we are restricting, or we are consuming, or we are rationing, and we are now at the moment trying to match with the exports revenue with the imports. At the moment we have stopped paying our debts other than multilateral debts. How do we come out of the mess? For me, 2 things have to be done. Shonky, fraudulent decisions has to stop. It has to start from the parliament. The second one is you must have people who are able to make competent decision making. Adroitness should be at its best.
Are we on the right path
I think the important, just in a nutshell, why are we in this position? In my view, there are 4 key reasons. The first one, rule of law and accountability. For me, that's one of the biggest issues we have. Number 2 is this populist policies and our entitlement culture. Number 3 is historical issue of the twin deficits that we have run. The balance of payments and the budget deficit. The other one is that we have not been able to separate governance from religion. To go forward, I think we should pay more taxes.
Is that something we need to talk about now when people are already suffering?
I agree. I have a condition on that. If I am paying a rupee more of taxes, I want the government to cut down expenditure. If I am going to pay ₹1,000,000 more, in my view, they should come and say, I'll cut down either 2 million or 3 million of expenditure. Defense expenditure, for me, at the current allocation of 376 billion, 13 years after the end of the conflict, needs to be reviewed. But people will always say there's national security, it cannot be threatened under any circumstance. I'm fully in agreement with that. But I was also told that the strength of our forces is actually bigger than the forces in Ukraine, who are fighting a battle right now. In the long term, to get out of this, we got to invest in health and education. And our allocation for health and education is almost same together to what we are giving for defense on a yearly basis. We allocate just over 200 billion for health and education. So that's where the issue is.
What can we do to fix this?
In the government, there are no people who understand tax properly, because tax is highly specialized area. When you say the tax system, basically there are 2 areas. You have the tax policies, then the tax administration. So in Sri Lanka, both elements of the tax system are very weak. So this tax policy formulation, contradictory policies, etc., why we see is because of the shortfall of the policy makers, the knowledge in relation to taxation. So the answer for that is basically, if you want to go forward in relation to the making proper tax policies, there has to be a political independent national tax council. So this council will consist of people who understand taxation and maybe some business people as well. All the tax policies will be formulated by this national tax council, not by the politicians there. How the tax policies are being formulated is because of the lobby groups reaching the incumbent finance minister, basically patching the tax systems.
Now, the Colombo Stock Exchange ASPI continued positive sentiment for a 4th straight session as investor sentiment was upheld despite slight profit blocking on selected plantation and transportation sector shares. The ASPI surged by over 100 points as market opened but declined steeply few minutes after. Subsequently, the index seesawed from red to green with significant volatility, while buying interest dominated in the hotel sector counters and export-oriented counters. The SPI closed at 9,316, gaining 62 points. Turnover continued to remain healthy at 4.2 billion, led by a 21% contribution from the capital goods sector, while transportation and food, beverage and tobacco sectors equally contributed 20% each to the overall turnover. Furthermore, foreigners closed as net buyers. Now, members of the G7 have agreed to impose a price cap on Russian oil in a bid to hit Moscow's ability to finance. Finance ministers said the cap on crude oil and petroleum products would also help reduce global energy prices. The cap will be set at a level based on a range of technical inputs. Announcing the price cap on Russian oil, the G7 said they will continue to stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes. Russia said it would stop selling oil to countries that imposed price caps. And that's all the news we have for you this evening. Join us again tomorrow at the same time. Good night.